their customers.
But huge users of the internet, like Google, Yahoo, and eBay, for instance, already pay millions a month for net access. Skeptics say the phone companies are really up to something else entirely.
It's just the Bell companies want the opportunity to charge twice. They want to charge for Google to connect to the network at all, and then they want to charge another price to reach their consumers.
Timothy Wu teaches technology law at Columbia University.
Companies can do two things. They can either offer more value, or they can try and extract cash from companies because they are in a position to threaten them. The first helps the economy. The second is just extortion. It's the Tony Soprano system. You know, it's like a protection racket, and it's not an economically productive activity to toll booth companies because you happen to have the power over the gateway to do so.
Wu says the phone company's plan would strike down the most important rule of the internet in place from day one. That once you're online, it's like being on a highway. The speed limit's the same for everyone, and you can go just as fast as anyone else. But not under the phone company's plan. Let's say Verizon is running the internet toll booth in your neighborhood and Yahoo and Google are lined up to pay. Verizon could decide to charge Yahoo a low toll for access to the fast lane, but demand a prohibitively high fee from Google, relegating it to the slow lane. So Yahoo's search engine would come up on your computer almost instantly, while Google's wouldn't. That kind of discrimination is a lot like something that happened in the 19th century in an earlier round of the media revolution.
Write on a telegraph blank, and your words appear by modern magic on paper thousands of miles away.
In those days, Western Union had a monopoly over telegraph wires. The company gave the Associated Press a big break on fees, but charged other news organizations a lot more to keep them off the wires.
And they used that monopoly. They used it to favor political parties they liked. They used it to favor political candidates they wanted to destroy.
So how did that instance of discrimination get broken?
Eventually the government intervened with something called common carriage. That is, they said the telegraph is no different than an innkeeper, no different than a port, no different than a train. It has to carry everybody's stuff equally.
So this idea of common carriage, the idea is that as long as I can pay, you
Right.
have to take my business.
Correct. That's the idea. You have to pay, and then we don't discriminate as who you are. And government, since the 16th century, have felt that certain parts of the economy, ports, canals, roads, trains, innkeepers, have to deal with all customers equally, that's important for the health of the country. And I think we have the same situation, that the ports and canals of the 18th century are the internet in the 21st century. And that's why we need to relearn those lessons.
Remember, common carriage means the network doesn't discriminate. The internet version of common carriage is known as network neutrality. That means the internet is neutral in the same way the grid that supplies electricity is neutral. It doesn't discriminate between things you might plug into it.
Electricity is one of our most faithful servants. It gives us light. It starts our cars. It cooks and refrigerates our food. These represent few of the innumerable applications of electricity.
You have the grid, and it makes a lot of things possible. You can plug a lot of things into it, and we're not stuck at the first generation of vacuum cleaners. Vacuum cleaners now are better than they were 40 years ago. And one of the reasons is because the electric network, the current that comes out, is neutral. It has no opinion as to whether Samsung or General Electric makes a better device. It just gives the electricity, and whoever wants to can design a product to those specifications. And the same thing is true with the internet. It's maybe the easiest way to understand it, is there's two sides. There's the market for the appliances. That's Google, and that's Yahoo, and that's all these other companies. And then there's the companies that supply the wires, the electricity.
But without neutrality, Wu says, internet companies and websites that couldn't afford the toll for the fast lane would be at a huge disadvantage, because it might take so long for them to load onto your computer that you'd give up and go to sites that could afford the toll.
The thing about the internet is we don't always know what's going to come next. Who would have predicted blogs? Who would have predicted that YouTube would take off? Who would have detected that Google would be the dominant search engine 10 years ago? Nobody knew. And one of the reasons that all these things keep showing up is because the whole world has the chance to show up and try and create a new application.
Those new ideas were possible because until recently, the federal government played traffic cop and enforced net neutrality rules.
It is basic government regulation that allows access to this common infrastructure that is critical to the original birth of the Internet and to the ongoing operation of the Internet.
Earl Comstock represents companies that depend on equal access to the Internet. For example, a company called Vonage that lets you make phone calls over your Internet connection.
So my companies would be hurt because without that right to interconnect, we're unable to provide service to customers, and that then diminishes competition, which means higher consumer prices, less innovation, and fewer choices.
Other advocates of neutrality say it protects free speech, because without it, phone and cable companies could censor Internet traffic they don't like.
It happens that a lot of the IT industry isn't terribly enthusiastic about the Second Amendment.
Larry Pratt is director of Gun Owners of America.
We want the Brady campaign and Gun Owners of America to have the same fair use of the Internet highway, and we don't want speed bumps that are allowed by government to be placed on one side or the other. So if we want to buy 100 units of Internet broadband capability, that should be the same price to us as somebody else. And that way we're guaranteed that if our supporters support us enough, we're going to be able to get our message out regardless of what the big boys may or may not like.
Those big boys in the cable and phone industries spent years fighting net neutrality. They said the law was ambiguous and archaic because it was drawn up for the old world of copper wire, before broadband. In 2002, the Federal Communications Commission decided that neutrality didn't apply to cable internet. And in the summer of 2005, the FCC let phone companies off the hook too. Suddenly, there were no more net neutrality rules. The FCC replaced them with suggested principles for an open internet.
A principle is never enough. You need to have rules, and you have to have enforceability.
This is the opportunity to vote to keep the Internet the way it is.
In Congress, Democrat Ed Markey led a movement to pass a law that would restore the rules of net neutrality.
Net neutrality was the rule until August of 2005. Since August of 2005, telephone company executives have been saying, there are pipes. We built those pipes. We have a right to create the rules for those pipes. We have a right to charge whomever, whatever we want. Those are the new rules, the rules of monopolists, the rules of duopolists. We have to go back to the rules which created the Internet and served it very well until August of 2005.
We're not going to go back.
Republican Fred Upton says the rules just aren't necessary.
A lot of us believe that we don't have a problem today, and we're not going to regulate, overly regulate a product when in fact we don't have a problem, which might stifle the entrepreneurship and the progress that we want to make in the future.
But advocates of neutrality wonder whose entrepreneurship, whose progress? The phone and cable companies? Or the hundreds of thousands of online bloggers, activists, advocates, artists, and journalists who were thriving under the old rules?
Today you have a situation where a blog can take on a cable news network or can compete for a cable news network's customers based on quality, based on merit. If people like Instapundit better than they like CNN, or they like the commentary on Daily Kos better than they like Fox, they can go there. And they're about equal. I mean, they have more money, but they're about equal. And often you find out that a successful blogger will have more customers and more people watching than CNN Crossfire. This is because the network isn't discriminating, isn't picking favorites. In a network that picks favorites where one is faster, where the other is blocked or harder to reach, that favors the entities that are established, that can pay the companies, and ultimately changes the entire information environment.
It sounds like what you're saying is that we'll have sort of the same media that we had in the pre-internet age. In other words, not as open a forum.
I think that's right. I think we'll go back to the way the things have always been. which is to say a couple